Hey everyone, welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at Highway 413 in Ontario and all of the species at risk that could be impacted. And our main source for this is the report Highway 413, The Road to Our Ruin. It's a report from Environmental Defense.
Yeah.
And they've really pulled no punches with this title, have they?
Oh, it's definitely attention grabbing. And I think for good reason. This report was put together by a team of biologists, and they used data from the Ontario government's own Natural Heritage Information Center,
Oh, wow.
as well as other reputable sources like eBird. So they're really drawing on the best available science to highlight the potential consequences of this highway.
And you know what's really interesting about this report to me is that it's dedicated to Linda Van Duzersol, who was a passionate advocate for protecting Ontario's green spaces.
Yeah, it adds a very personal layer to this whole issue.
It really does, yeah. It's not just numbers on a page.
Right.
So before we get into the specifics, can we just kind of paint a picture for our listeners? What exactly is Highway 413?
Sure. So we're talking about a major 400 series highway, a multi-lane freeway, cutting across a 59-kilometer stretch from Vaughan to Milton in the Greater Toronto area.
Okay, so this is the big project.
Yeah, it is.
And what's the main argument in favor of it?
Well, the main argument you'll hear is to reduce traffic congestion. But as this report highlights, there's a lot more to consider.
Right. You don't just carve a massive highway through a landscape and not expect there to be any impact.
Right, especially on the species that call it home.
So let's talk about some of the biggest concerns that this report raises.
Okay, well, one of the biggest is habitat loss. I mean, think about it. You're literally taking a chunk of land and paving it over.
Yeah.
So that's prime habitat, just gone.
Gone, yeah. And it's not just the highway itself, right?
No, that's just the beginning. You've got all the development that often follows, more houses, businesses, parking lots. It's like this ripple effect.
Yeah, it just keeps spreading out further and further.
And then
that leads to, I guess, the next concern, which is fragmentation.
Yeah, fragmentation. So, it makes it harder for species to move around, to find food, to mate.
Yeah, it's almost like we're putting up all these walls.
Yeah, you can think of it like trying to get around a city. If suddenly whole neighborhoods were blocked off, it wouldn't be easy.
No. Then there's the pollution factor.
Pollution, yeah. I mean, more cars mean more emissions, both in the air and on the ground.
Absolutely. And that can impact water quality, soil health, even the air that these species breathe.
Yeah. It's a multi-pronged attack.
Yeah. And we can't forget about the very real danger of roadkill.
Oh, absolutely. Especially for slow-moving species like turtles or amphibians that have to cross roads to get to their breeding grounds.
Yeah. They're just not equipped to deal with that kind of traffic.
No, it's a death trap.
It is. So this report identifies 29 species at risk that could be directly impacted by Highway 413.
Wow.
It's not just the rare or obscure species either. We're talking about birds, turtles, salamanders, fish, even trees.
Yeah, it's a wide range.
So rather than go through all of them one by one, I think it makes sense to kind of look at them through the lens of these threats we've just outlined.
Okay, that makes sense.
Let's start with habitat fragmentation.
Sure.
It seems to be a major issue here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like taking a mirror and shattering it into a bunch of pieces. You can still see reflections in each shard, but the overall image is lost.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
And that's what happens to ecosystems when they're fragmented.
So which species are particularly vulnerable to this fragmentation effect?
Well, think about animals that need to move across large areas to survive. Like the Blandings turtle, they travel between wetlands to find food and mates. And their journeys can take them across roads, through backyards. A highway would be a major obstacle for them.
Yeah, it's like putting a giant wall right in their path.
Exactly.
And the report mentions that the Ontario government has a history of issuing permits for projects that harm Blandings turtles, even though they're a threatened species.
Yeah, it's a mixed message, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. It's like we're trying to protect them with one hand and then harm them with the other.
Exactly.
And it's not just Blandings turtles.
No, it's not.
Species like the eastern musk turtle and the snapping turtle, which also rely on those connected habitats. They face a similar dilemma.
They do.
Speaking of the snapping turtle, they have another interesting challenge. They often lay their eggs in gravel road shoulders.
Oh, wow.
Which puts them right in the path of traffic.
Yeah, talk about a bad place to build a nest.
It's like, it's hard enough being a turtle in this human-dominated world, but then to have to worry about your eggs getting crushed by a car.
Yeah, it's a tough reality for them.
It is. Then there are the Jefferson salamander and the unisexual ambystoma. They have these incredible migrations where they travel between breeding ponds and forests.
It's amazing how far some of these creatures travel, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But their journeys often take them across busy roads.
Yeah, it's like running a gauntlet. And Highway 413 would make that gauntlet even more dangerous.
Especially since it's proposed to connect with Highways 401 and 407, which are already major obstacles.
Right, so we're talking about a cumulative effect here.
Right. It's not just the new highway. It's how it interacts with existing roads and development.
Exactly.
It's this complex web of impacts.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about pollution.
Okay.
We mentioned how highways contribute to air and water pollution. But which species are most sensitive to these impacts?
Well, aquatic species are definitely high up on the list. Things like the red-side dace, which is a tiny endangered minnow. They really rely on clean, clear water to survive.
Okay, so how would highway runoff impact them?
Well, highway runoff carries all kinds of pollutants. Oil, salt, heavy metals. That stuff can be devastating to their habitat.
And the report points out that Highway 413 would cross over 130 rivers and streams, many of which are potential red-side dace habitat.
Wow, so it's like we're rolling out the red carpet for pollution right into their living room.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the immediate impact of construction either.
No, it's the long-term effects too. Think about all the increased development, more traffic, more pollution seeping into the water.
Right, it's this ongoing assault on the ecosystem.
Exactly.
And we know that. Ontario's rivers and streams are already facing a lot of pressure from urbanization and agriculture.
Yeah, it's delicate balance. It's important to remember that even small changes can have big consequences.
Especially for species that are already struggling.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about habitat fragmentation and pollution. What about the more direct threat of road mortality?
Right, roadkill.
Which species are at the highest risk of becoming roadkill?
Well, we've already mentioned turtles. They're particularly vulnerable because they move slowly, and they often need to cross roads to get to their nesting or breeding grounds.
Right, but birds are also at risk.
Birds, yeah. Especially the ones that forage near the ground or have low flight paths.
The report highlights a few bird species that could be impacted, like the bank swallow, the barn swallow, and the chimney swift. And it's ironic, isn't it? The barn swallows and chimney swifts have adapted to using human-made structures. But even that adaptability has its limits.
Yeah, highways can create what are called ecological traps.
Ecological traps, okay. What does that mean?
It means the birds are attracted to areas that seem suitable, but are actually dangerous.
Okay, so how does that work with a highway?
Well, for example, they might be drawn to the insects that are attracted to highway lights, but then they become vulnerable to collisions with vehicles.
So it's like a case of mistaken identity with tragic consequences.
It is, yeah.
And speaking of tragic consequences, the report also points out that the Ontario government has actually downlisted the chimney swift's level of protection.
Oh, really?
Despite the fact that they're facing ongoing threats.
It's like saying, okay, you're doing a bit better now, so we're going to give you less protection.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
It makes you wonder if they're basing their decisions on the best available science, or if there are other factors at play.
That's a good question to ask.
It is, yeah. We've covered a lot of ground here, but we're just scratching the surface of all the species that could be affected by Highway 413. We still have insects and trees to discuss.
Right, and those are just as important to the overall ecosystem as the more charismatic species.
Absolutely. So stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world of insects and trees and explore how they too are being caught in the crosshairs of this controversial highway project.
You know, as we've been going through this report, it's striking how the Ontario government's actions, or sometimes inaction, are actually making things worse for some of these species.
It's a concerning pattern that emerges throughout the report.
Like with the eastern meadowlark, they're still relatively common, but their populations have been declining. And the report mentions that. The government has issued thousands of exemptions to the Endangered Species Act for activities impacting this bird.
Wow, so why even have these protections if they're so easily bypassed?
Yeah, that's a question a lot of people are asking. Yeah, it raises concerns about whether the government is truly committed to protecting these species, or whether economic development is taking priority.
And it's not just a matter of issuing permits.
Yeah.
The report also highlights cases where the government has actually downlifted the protection level for certain species, even though there's evidence that they're still facing serious threats.
Right. The chimney swift is a prime example. They've adapted to using chimneys as nesting sites, but their populations are still declining. Yet the government decided to lower their protection status.
Yeah, it's almost like saying, okay, you're doing a bit better, so now you're on your own.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's a head-scratcher. And it's not an isolated incident either.
Like who?
What else? Well, the Midland painted turtle, which is Ontario's most common turtle, was recently stripped of its protected status.
Oh, wow.
At least temporarily.
It's almost as if the government is trying to make these species disappear from the endangered list, not by actually helping them recover, but by simply changing their classification.
Yeah, it's a bureaucratic sleight of hand that undermines the whole purpose of the Endangered Species Act.
Okay, so before we get too deep into the politics of it all, let's talk about insects.
Okay.
We often overlook them.
Yeah.
They play such a vital role in the ecosystem.
Oh, they really do. They're pollinators, decomposers, food sources for other animals. They're the little engines that keep the whole system running.
And the report focuses on a few different bumblebee species that would be affected by the highway. And aren't bumblebees already facing a lot of challenges these days?
Oh, absolutely. Habitat loss, pesticide use, climate change is taking a toll on their populations worldwide.
So how would Highway 413 add to their woes?
Well, a few different ways. First, you've got the direct loss of habitat. The highway would carve right through areas where these bees forage and nest.
And then you've got that fragmentation effect.
Fragmentation, yeah. Imagine you're a bumblebee trying to get from one patch of wildflowers to another. And suddenly there's this massive highway in your way. Right. It's not going to be easy.
Plus, we can't forget about climate change.
Climate change, right.
More highways mean more cars, which means more greenhouse gas emissions.
Exactly.
And the report estimates that Highway 413 would generate over 17 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050.
Wow.
That's a significant contribution to a problem.
Yeah.
That's already impacting bumblebees and countless other species.
It's like we're accelerating towards a future where these insects might not be able to survive.
So from the buzz of bees to the rustle of leaves, let's talk about trees.
Okay, trees.
The report mentions two species in particular that are at risk. From Highway 413, the black ash and the butternut.
Both of these trees are facing serious challenges, and the highway could be the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back.
Let's start with the black ash.
Okay.
What's their story?
Well, they're found in seasonally flooded wetlands, and they've been hit hard by the invasive emerald ash borer. It's a beetle that's been decimating ash trees across North America.
Yeah, I've heard about that beetle. It's like a horror movie for trees.
It's pretty devastating. And on top of that, black ash are also vulnerable to habitat loss and changes in water levels.
So how would Highway 413 impact them?
Well, the highway would
Right.
cross several areas where black ash populations are found, including along the Humber River. So any changes to the local hydrology, increased runoff, altered drainage patterns could harm these trees.
So it's not just about the highway.
Yeah.
Directly destroying trees.
No, it's about those more subtle long-term impacts it could have on the surrounding environment.
Right, like a ripple effect.
Exactly.
And what's particularly concerning is that black ash recently lost their protected status under Ontario's Endangered Species Act, at least for now.
So they're already facing a major threat from the emerald ash borer, and now they've lost some of the legal protections that were supposed to help them.
Okay, let's move on to the butternut.
The butternut.
Another tree that's fighting for survival. What's the main threat to them?
Well, they've been devastated by butternut canker. It's a fungal disease that's killed off a vast majority of butternuts in eastern North America.
So finding a healthy butternut these days must be like finding a four-leaf clover.
It's not easy.
And the report indicates that. Mature butternuts are scattered throughout the GTA in low densities, including in areas that would be impacted by Highway 413.
Right.
So even a small amount of habitat loss could have a big impact on their already fragile populations.
Exactly.
But to make matters worse, the report points out that Ontario hasn't done a great job of protecting butternuts, even though they're listed as endangered.
Oh, really?
Permits have been issued for their removal, with little to no compensation or mitigation.
It's like a recurring theme in this report. Species at risk, facing multiple threats, and the government's actions or inactions often making things worse.
That's a frustrating pattern.
It is, and it really underscores the need for greater transparency. and accountability when it comes to environmental decision-making.
Going through this report, it's kind of striking how many different types of species are at risk from this project we've talked about. Birds and turtles and salamanders and fish and insects and even trees.
Yeah, it really makes you realize how interconnected everything is.
So I guess the question is, if Highway 413 goes ahead, what are those potential long-term consequences for this whole web of life?
Well, in the short term, obviously, we're talking about direct habitat loss, roadkill, pollution, those immediate impacts.
Ooh.
But it's the long run. It's those cumulative effects that are really worrying. Fragmentation can lead to smaller, isolated populations, making them more vulnerable to disease, inbreeding, even extinction.
So they're kind of slowly being squeezed out of existence.
Exactly. And as those species disappear, it triggers this cascade effect throughout the ecosystem. Think about the insects that pollinate our crops or the trees that filter our air and water. Losing them would have far-reaching consequences, even for us humans.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that we're not separate from nature.
Right.
We're part of this web of life, too, and our actions have consequences.
And sometimes those consequences are unintended. We think, oh, we're just building a road, but it's not that simple. We're altering the landscape. We're changing the flow of water, disrupting ancient migration routes.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if we're being a little bit short-sighted in our pursuit of progress. Are we sacrificing long-term sustainability for short-term convenience?
It's a question we need to be asking ourselves.
So what can we do? Is it all doom and gloom? Or is there hope for these species?
I wouldn't say it's all doom and gloom. There's always hope. But it's going to take action. We need to be more informed about these issues, and we need to hold our elected officials accountable for making decisions that prioritize the environment.
Okay, so what kind of actions can people take? It feels overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah.
Like one person.
Yeah.
Can't really make a difference.
Well, first and foremost, educate yourself. Read reports like this one from Environmental Defense. Learn about the species that are at risk in your own area. Knowledge is power. And the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to advocate for change.
So it starts with awareness.
It does. And then you can take that awareness and turn it into action. Support organizations that are working to protect the environment. Write to your elected officials. Let them know that you care about these issues.
This is about making our voices heard.
It is. And don't underestimate the power of individual actions, even small things, like planting native species in your garden or reducing your car use can make a difference.
It's about shifting our mindset, thinking about the long-term consequences of our choices. We need to move beyond this idea that we're separate from nature. We are nature. Our well-being is inextricably linked to the health of the planet.
Well said.
This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. It's a sobering reminder of the challenges we face. But it's also a call to action. We can't just sit back and watch as these species disappear. We need to step up and be their advocates.
I agree.
We encourage everyone listening to learn more about this issue, explore the resources mentioned in the report, and consider what actions you can take to make a difference.
Remember, we're all connected. What we do to the planet, we do to ourselves.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new and are feeling inspired to act.